Scarcely a day goes by in modern American politics without the word democracy being used to emphasize one of the most important principles of the nation. This is especially true among left-wing politicians and pundits. In his inaugural address, Joe Biden used the word democracy more than 11 times during his speech, more times than in any other inauguration speech. In his last State of the Union address, he used the word democracy 10 times, with repeated references to the threats our democracy faces. Among left-wing mainstream media, a constant assault of rhetoric about the threats to our democracy is unleashed whenever the subject of Trump and right-wing politics surfaces, so much so that a compilation of mainstream media clips uttering the exact same words on the topic reveals just how much of our media is scripted.
Agenda control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Google Trends shows a clear spike in searches of the word democracy during the last 2 elections, obviously fueled by Trump's entry into the race. Following Trump's election win in 2016, The Washington Post changed its newspaper slogan to "Democracy Dies in Darkness," the implication being that America is first and foremost a democracy. Famous titles like Democracy Awakening, Notes on the State of America, and How Democracies Die, both published in our post-Trump era, emphasize democracy as one of America's deepest values and lament its erosion by creeping authoritarianism. This phenomenon is all the more astonishing when one considers that neither the Declaration of Independence nor the American Constitution contain any references to democracy, that the word democracy itself does not exist in either of those documents. On the contrary, what those documents make abundantly clear is that the ideals of liberty and freedom, and not democracy, form the bedrock of this new nation. The Constitution in particular appears to have been specifically designed to constrain governmental powers through the frequent use of the negative "shall not" expression, as in the following amendments. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. First Amendment. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Second Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. Fourth Amendment. A famous story is told about Ben Franklin during the last days of the Constitutional Convention, when Elizabeth Powell came up to him and asked him, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" To which he replied, "A republic if you can keep it." It's important to note that Franklin did not use the word democracy to describe the nation, but a republic. The word republic comes from the Latin phrase res publica, literally translated as public affair, and represents a state in which power is held by the public. In America, this power would be enshrined in the Constitution, preventing the government from encroaching on people's fundamental God-given rights. This understanding of a republic is different from what the Founding Fathers took to be a democracy, which they saw as unstable and tyrannical, a form of government as actual tyrannies. Democracies in this sense simply meant majority rule, and so whatever a majority wills at any given time happens to be the law of the land, regardless of its consequences on individual liberty, freedom, and happiness. An obvious example is where a majority rules to deprive a minority of their rights due to their ethnic or religious background. This form of pure democracy, as the Founding Fathers understood it, represented a tyranny of the majority, equally as dangerous as the tyranny of a monarch or an oligarchy. Alexander Hamilton, in a speech to Congress, says the following: "It has been observed by an honorable gentleman that a pure democracy, if it were practicable, would be the most perfect government. Experience has proved that no position in politics is more false than this. The ancient democracies, in which the people themselves deliberated, never possessed one feature of good government. Their very character was tyranny, their figure deformity." James Madison warns us about the dangers of a democracy in the Federalist Papers of 1788. Hence it is that such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. John Adams, America's second president, wrote the following in a letter to John Taylor: "Remember democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. Thousands of years earlier, Plato in the Republic understood the dangers of democracy when he said, through Socrates, "And so tyranny naturally arises out of democracy, and the most aggravated form of tyranny and slavery out of the most extreme form of liberty." Against this danger, the Founding Fathers sought to create a nation where individual rights and freedoms will always be protected, both against the tyranny of the majority and the excesses of big government. The product of this effort was the Constitution, followed by the division of government into the three branches we know today as the legislative, executive, and judicial, collectively forming a set of checks and balances that ensure the preservation of individual rights and freedoms while advancing society on many of its pressing social and political issues. And yet, it would be foolish to assume from the foregoing that democratic institutions have no place in American life. One of the primary causes of the American Revolution was the fact that taxes were levied on the colonists without allowing for their fair representation in British Parliament, summed up in the famous slogan, "Taxation without representation." The Founding Fathers understood the importance of representation in government and sought to balance its democratic element with a constitution that limited government power over the people, culminating in a government of the people, by the people, for the people. This they termed, quote, representative democracy, unquote, as contrasted with the chaotic pure democracy of the ancient Greek polis. Alexander Hamilton makes this idea clear when he writes, "But a representative democracy, where the right of election is well secured and regulated, and the exercise of the legislative, executive, and judiciary authorities is vested in select persons, chosen really and not nominally by the people, will in my opinion be most likely to be happy, regular, and durable. In a representative democracy, the people elect their representatives, who then act on their behalf to discern the greater affairs of political life, serving the true interests of the nation. This is different from the people directly voting on policies or issues, which many Founding Fathers saw as being no different from ancient pure democracies that waste, exhaust, and murder themselves. This is an important distinction. Representative democracy shifts the citizenry's focus from deciding directly on particular issues or policies to deciding on which individuals can best represent their interests on various issues as constituents within the nation. Presumably, those representatives would be the moral and intellectual elite of their constituents, and would as a result be in a much better position to engage with the political side of American life, advancing the nation's interests while providing for the breadth of perspective offered by acting on behalf of his or her constituents. James Madison makes this clear when he says the following in the Federalist Papers: "The effect of a representative democracy is to refine and enlarge the public views, by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens, whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of the nation." The idea of diversity and unity is a common motif among the writings of the Founding Fathers, who recognized the diversity of the nation as a great strength. Indeed, the popular slogan of late among Western leaders, "Diversity is our strength," much ridiculed by conservatives for its woke implications, would not have been out of place in the early days of the American nation. And all the founding documents attest to the fact that the diversity of viewpoints enlarged by the extension of liberty to all citizens was a deliberate outcome in which it was believed the true strength of the nation would lie. Its spirit is perfectly captured by the famous American motto, "E pluribus unum," out of many, one, that appears in the Great Seal of the United States. But in many ways, this system possessed a weakness. The rise of single-issue voters in recent years and the polarization of America on many fundamental issues, guns, abortion, religion, big government, has fostered an environment where citizens are becoming less concerned about electing better, more moral and intelligent representatives, and more concerned about which representatives can be best utilized for the achievement of their goals on those issues. And the result is a system one level removed from direct democracy, or a kind of pseudo-direct democracy, in which the modern politician acts less as a representative and more as a vessel for the achievement of specific political ends desired by the voter. Moreover, the sheer magnitude of the differences of opinion on fundamental matters pertaining to government, religion, immigration, sex, gender, and even race has arguably created a diversity without unity, resembling more the intertribal conflict of distinct factions and less the kind of harmonious integration of a diversity unified by common ends. On the other hand, there's reason to believe that the Founding Fathers understood this danger, as in the following remarks made by John Adams. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Echoing the same sentiment, James Madison said the following during the Virginia Ratifying Convention: "Is there no virtue among us? If there be not, we are in a wretched situation. No theoretical checks, no form of government can render us secure. To suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without any virtue in the people is a chimerical idea. If there be sufficient virtue and intelligence in the community, it will be exercised in the selection of these men, so that we do not depend on their virtue or put confidence in our rulers, but in the people who are to choose them. And if the people who are to choose possess neither virtue nor intelligence, or are violently opposed to each other's interests without a common moral, ethnic, or religious bond between them, then the natural outcome of a wretched strife shouldn't be surprising." In recent American elections, the constant tug-of-war between conservatives and liberals on so many issues reflects the kind of disunited diversity that can only produce the social and political stalemate already observed in the country, where the one party once elected enacts laws, policies, and regulations that are duly reversed by the other once in power, and vice versa. And the culmination of this process will inevitably be tyranny, as Plato has foreseen, when a strongman leader will decide to uproot the democratic principles of the nation for the sake of social stability and progress. America is best described as a constitutional republic with democratic institutions. And perhaps one can view the sheer persistence of the two-party system in America, Republican versus Democrats, to the exclusion of all other forms of parties and ideologies, as a manifestation of a deep wrestling within the American psyche between those two ideals in its founding, a yin to the yang that plays out in the drama of American politics, and therefore a healthy expression of the political roots of America. But this wouldn't, strictly speaking, be true. The Founding Fathers deliberately designed the Constitution and system of government for the explicit purpose of expanding the liberties and freedoms accorded to each one of its citizens by preventing the government from encroaching on those rights. Democratic institutions were implemented as a means to that end, and only in that specific form that we call representative democracy, not direct or pure democracy, and only for a people that the Founding Fathers considered moral, religious, or virtuous. And to the degree to which we've been successful at expanding democratic privileges to women and minorities over the last half-century, there's been a corresponding increase in the power of big government that's wholly antithetical to the true intentions of the nation's founders. Americans would be best served to understand the real ideological foundations of their nation, being always on guard when a politician or pundit tries to define America as a democracy, when nothing could be further from the truth.